to embrace what God is doing, not resist what God is doing. And too often we resist that change. In fact, as I was thinking about today's message, it all deals with, and we're continuing our study in the book of Joshua, so if you have your Bibles, you can turn to Joshua chapter 3. But as we look at this portion of Scripture, we see that change was happening for the people of Israel. And I was thinking about change, and change can happen gradually over time and you see it coming, or change can hit you like you run into a brick wall when you go around the corner. And all of a sudden, life is going to be completely different because you've approached this point of quote-unquote no return. This point where you have to cross the line and embrace the change, or you back up and you shy away from it. And I remember a situation like that happening to me about 28 and a half years ago. You see, I was enjoying God's creation. I was driving in the mountains around Mount Rainier, and I hadn't seen Mount Rainier for a while, but I was up on these dirt roads, and as I came around this corner, there was this beautiful picture with trees on either side, a dirt road going straight towards the mountain, and a snow-capped volcanic mountain right in front of me, and I skidded to a stop and looked at that. But that's not the thing that made me skid to a stop. You see, earlier that day, and actually the day before, I'd been doing my devotions, and as I was doing my devotions, I was reading in that famous portion of the Bible that lots of people know, even if they don't go to church, 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We call it the love chapter. And, love is patient, love is kind, it doesn't envy, it does not boast, and it goes on talking about what love is. And as I was reading that, God spoke to my heart saying, "Do you love?" And it was specific about a young lady. Do you love her? And I slammed on the brakes, saw this beautiful scene of Mount Rainier, but I was more focused on what God was challenging me because I was single and I was happy and change was coming my way. In the middle of a dirt road with a beautiful background, there was this line that I came to because I looked at that definition of love and I evaluated it, and God said, well, does it apply? Does it apply? Does it apply? And every time I looked at the young lady and considered my intent towards her, everything in that chapter applied towards her. And then he challenged me, are you willing to cross that line and say that you love her? Well, I don't even know if she likes me. That doesn't matter. God didn't challenge me to do what we call love, which is, what am I going to get out of it? He challenged me to love. And there was that line, and as I prayed and as I talked to God right there in the middle of a dirt road staring up Mount Rainier, I decided I was going to cross that line. I decided I was going to love her regardless. And so as a 27-year-old, 26-year-old man, I went home, I talked to my bank, I got a bank card in the name of this young lady connected to my account. Because she was in Bible school, she was struggling with finances, and I was going to provide, because that's what love does. Love provides. And so I had this card with me, and a couple weeks later, I was out for a visit to her house in the middle of nowhere, and I talked to her parents about doing a really special candlelight dessert in the middle of the night up in the mountains, and they agreed. I don't know why they agreed, but they agreed, and I took Erin into the middle of the mountains. And after we had this nice dessert, I told her that there was something important I had to share with her, and it was connected to that card, which I hadn't given to her. And I looked at her and I said, Erin, I want you to know that I have chosen to love you. And she screamed, no, you can't, and got up and walked into the dark. No, she's scared of the dark. Okay, so she walked into the dark. Okay, she's not going to go too far. She's scared of the dark. But she was emphatic that I wasn't allowed to love her. But I was convinced that God told me to love her, and I made that choice. I didn't fall in love. I crossed a line of no return. And I chose to do it because God challenged me to do it. And we're looking today at the people of Israel, and they're up to that point where they are getting ready to cross a line. And we're all challenged to cross a line. In fact, there are lines that God gives us all over the place. And when we come to that moment of decision, it is a crisis of belief. Not that we're going to give up our faith in God, but are we going to understand what God's asking us to do? And are we going to step in obedience across that line? Because there's no going back. Once we cross that line, we are now headed in the direction God is leading us. We're walking in his footsteps, and we're getting ready to receive what he has promised he would give us. And that's what the people of Israel are getting ready to do. They're getting ready to cross that line. And God says, I'm going to give you this land. Not you're going to go conquer it. I'm going to give it to you. But you have to show that you believe. You have to confront that crisis of belief. You have to step out in faith, and you have to cross the line. And that's what we find in our text. If we start off in Joshua chapter 3, verse 1, it says this. Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to the Jordan. They camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the priests who are Levites carrying it, you are to move out from your position and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 1,000 yards between you and the ark. Do not go near it. Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. Joshua said to the priests, take up the ark of the covenant, and pass on ahead of the people. So they took it up and went ahead of them. And the Lord said to Joshua, today you will be exalted in the eyes of all Israel, so they will know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the ark of the covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan waters, go stand in the river. And I want to stop right there because we're given a lot in this, but this helps us highlight our first point today. And that is, we need to learn to walk by faith and not by sight. That's that crisis of belief. And it's something you hear a lot, but we do it very little. We like to walk by sight and not by faith because walking by faith is uncomfortable. Walking by faith means you don't know the outcome of what you're doing, but you're willing to do it because God told you to do it. I didn't know the outcome of professing my love and my commitment to love Erin. I didn't know where that was going to go. I definitely wasn't expecting her to say, no, I'm not allowed, and then run into the dark. That was not on my radar of any possibility of what would happen. But that's what happened that night. And then later, God convinced her that, okay, yeah, it was a good thing. But I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if giving a college person access to my bank account was a wise idea. But I know God told me to do that as a step of faith. She never used the card until after we were married. But God told me to do that. He told me to take that step to show that I was committed to doing what I was doing. And here we see God challenging the people of Israel in the same way. He says, you know what I've given you, and that is the promised land. You know how good it is because the spies have gone in and out twice in the last 40 years. You know the potential that's there. But now it's time to stop knowing and to start stepping out, but you're not going to know how to step out because I'm just going to tell you what to do, and you have to take that next step. And I'm going to tell you what to do, and you're going to take that next step. I'm not going to give you the big picture other than the fact I'm giving you the land. But all the little details, it's going to come one step at a time. It's going to come one step at a time. And are we willing to walk by faith and not by sight? The scriptures that we read in the first 8 verses said that they had never been that way before. That's why they were to keep the Ark of the Covenant in their focus, because they were to follow the Ark. And why was following the Ark so important? The Ark of the Covenant was a symbol of the presence of God. Because when they set up the tabernacle and they put the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies, it says that God's presence came and rested there. And so they were supposed to keep the presence of God in sight because they didn't know where they were going. They just knew they were supposed to follow the presence. We need to make sure that we are walking by faith. When we have to walk by faith, amazing things happen because we start letting go of all of our preconceived ideas, all of our habits that we've developed, all the things that we've relied on, because now we're relying on God and God alone. And we need to do that. We have to walk by faith when crossing the threshold. The future is always unknown. So we might as well know the one who's in control of the future and follow him. It's a logical, simple thing, but it's so hard to do because we have our logic, we have our plans, and we get stuck in our own ways. And we want to hold on to our way of doing things instead of doing it God's way. The people of Israel had walked through the wilderness for 40 years. Their clothes had not run out. They had always been provided food. And now God was saying things are going to be different. We're going to cross that line, and there's not going to be the going back. Are you willing to continue to walk by faith? And not only that, consider the conditions of their step of faith. There was approximately 2 million plus people there on the bank of the river at flood stage, the highest flood stage. So they figured floodwaters were 15 to 25 feet above normal flow. And they're getting ready to take 2 million people across that point. How? By faith. They weren't going to build a bridge. They weren't going to make boats. They weren't going to have one of the amphibious vehicles that the military has that can roll out there and then roll out a platform that you can drive across or anything else. No, God said, I'm going to do it, but you have to prepare yourself to get ready to walk by faith. Often, life circumstances will tell us this is impossible. That's the moment we know that faith is required. When we can't see a solution and it makes no sense to us, that's when God's saying, okay, now are you going to step out in faith? Because if you can figure out how to do it on your own, then I'm not required to be part of the equation. So God will always give us stuff we can't handle. Now, I know that goes opposite what a lot of people will say. Well, God will never give you anything you can't handle. Yes, he will. He intentionally does it so that we have to rely on him and we have to be living by faith. Because if we're not, we're doing it in our own power and our own strength, and that will always lead to disappointment in our lives. We have to be willing to take that step of faith. And think about the priests. The priests had to listen to Joshua and trust his leading and that he was hearing from God. Think about it. They're the priests. They're supposed to be taking care of the ark, and then he says, go stand in the floodwater. Now, if you know anything about the ark and the design of the Ark of the Covenant and how they're supposed to carry it, it says that they were to put the ark on these poles that were never taken out of it because they would build a tent, the tabernacle around the ark, and it was in the Holy of Holies, but no one was allowed to enter the Holy of Holies. So how could they pick up the ark and take it? The poles stuck out of the Holy of Holies. So they figure the poles are 20 plus feet long. So the guys in the front carrying the ark are 20 feet plus in advance of the guys in the back, but all the priests have to be in the water. Can you imagine being in the front? Hey, Joshua, the water's getting up to my knees. I'll keep going. God said you guys have to stand in the water. All you have to be in the water. Okay, come on. It's up to my waist. I can feel the current. It's floods. Keep going. God's got this. They had to walk by faith until all of them were in the water. All of them were obedient. And then God did the miraculous. We like to reverse the process. God, show us a miraculous sign and then we'll follow you. And God says, that's not the way it works. Because then you're walking by sight. If you can see what I'm doing, then you're walking by sight. You need to walk by faith. And the religious leaders of the community had to be the ones that started it out. When God asks us to do something, even something extreme, are we willing to obey? That's what it comes down to. When God asks us to do something that takes faith, which means we can't see the end result. We don't know what's going to happen, but we know God is saying do it. Are we willing to obey? That's what it comes down to. It's not a matter of preference. It's not a matter of understanding. It's a matter of obedience. And we know obedience is key because God says, if you love me, you'll obey me. So obedience is a sign of love and of faith and of trust and everything else. But as we look at this, we need to understand something that Joshua said to the people of Israel. If we go back to it, we see that the leaders went around and said, get ready. But then in verse 5, Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord is going to do amazing things among you. Consecrate yourself. God is challenging all of us to prepare to consecrate ourselves as well. The text says to consecrate. That means to set apart, to make holy, to purify, to make yourself acceptable to worship God, to make yourself prepared to walk in obedience to God. We need to learn how to consecrate ourselves again. We've lost the art of consecration. Because we will be busy, we will be doing stuff, we'll be planning our day, and we have everything down to the minute as we drive in, and all of a sudden we're fighting with the people in the car because things aren't going well, and we come here, and then all of a sudden we try to put on our worship. You don't put on worship because it's not a garment. It's a lifestyle we lead. But we need to learn to make ourselves holy so that we're acceptable for what God is going to do next. Are we prepared to take the step of faith because we prepared in advance to do that? Joshua said, we're going to do this. God is leading, God's guiding, and your spiritual leaders are going to set the example, but we all need to be ready. We need to be consecrated. We need to be set apart for what God has, and we need to walk in obedience. I remember one day I decided, it was a beautiful summer day, and I wanted to go for a walk, and I was living, not here, I was living in a much larger area, a much larger city, and I decided to go for a walk. And being born and raised in Africa, I figured, I don't need shoes. I love the feel of grass. And it was great until the grass ran out. And the people I were with wanted to keep walking. Well, 5 miles later, I get home. And my bare feet feel like there's little cushions under the heels and under the balls of my feet. And when I sat down and looked at them, they were cushions because I had these massive blisters. I was not prepared to take the walk that we ended up going on, but I stubbornly did it anyway. We already know I'm kind of stubborn, based on other stories I told about myself, but I wasn't prepared. Now the question is for us to do we ever really prepare as individuals? Do we ever really prepare as a church? Some of you might remember that, about a decade ago, Michael Ture, one of our missionaries, came. He actually came out and stayed at our house. My kids loved him because he was willing to play soccer with them, and it was great. We had a good time. And we had just finished, when he came, this time of prayer and fasting. And he asked me about it. He was really curious. The whole church was called to prayer and gathering. And I said, yeah. And I told him what we was doing. And his response wasn't, that's great. Because I talked about we're setting aside at least a half hour a day to do this. And we're going to set aside a whole meal. And he looked at me and goes, that's a nice start. Because prayer and fasting in his church in Sierra Leone is where they don't eat anything for a week. And they come and they pray at the church every single day for as long as they possibly can. It's not, hour's up, I'm out of here. They pray as long as they can. They have people who are there in their church 24 hours a day for an entire week, seeking God, passionately saying, God, we need you to move. We want you to move. We want you to direct us. How do we do it? And he goes, you guys have a nice start. And for a second, I got what do you mean? But then I thought about it. We've lost the art of praying, which means we've lost the art of preparing for what God wants to do next. We want the blessings, we want the excitement, we want to see the power of God, but we won't put in the time to prepare spiritually. That's one of the reasons why, as we move forward this year, we're going to have a weekly prayer meeting. Because those who are coming are going to say, God, I want you to do amazing things above and beyond whatever we could hope or imagine. I want you to change lives. I want you to revolutionize families. I want you to change this place so that we are who you want us to be. And we're going to put in the time to consecrate ourselves so that when you say move, we can step out in obedience and there's no hesitation. We need to get back to that. The Western church in general has lost the art of praying. We don't understand what it is. There's old saying, you need to push through in prayer. What does that mean? It means you pray about something until you see God answer. You don't stop. You don't take a coffee break. You don't go, it's a little bit late. You push through in prayer. That's why generations ago it was common for churches to have all-night prayer meetings. Where people would come after work, they'd pray all night, and they'd get up and go back to work. They didn't go back tired and exhausted because they had spent time with God, but they kept praying until God revolutionized what was going on. We've lost that. We're either too lazy, too distracted to spend that time in prayer. We need to rediscover and recommit ourselves. As Joshua said to the people of Israel, consecrate yourselves. Get ready for what God's going to do. God is telling us, consecrate yourselves. Get ready for what I want to do. And during the vision meeting, I get to share about how God surprised me as I was going through the facts and stuff of what happened last year, what God did for us this year. Because it was way beyond what I had thought. But God surprised me and goes, that's nothing compared to what I want to do. And we need to get ready for what God wants to do. Are you willing to put in the time to see God do great things? Some of the greatest evangelists, those who were inspirations to people who had, little ministries like Billy Graham, people who inspired evangelists like Moody. You can go visit their house in England, and one of the highlights is the bedroom. Not because it has a great bed, but because right next to the bed there are 2 divots. Because this man spent so much time on his knees praying every single night that he wore grooves in the floorboards of his bedroom. We need to rediscover what it means to pray like that. If you want to see your family changed by the power of God, you need to consecrate yourselves and discover the power of prayer again. If you want to see healings happen, that God gets the glory, you need to consecrate yourself and get back to what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. The key lesson here is, and God's called us to be a people of prayer. He says that every church is supposed to be a house of prayer for all nations. Well, if that's what God calls us, we need to get back to obeying God. The key lesson for this that we see is the whole idea that obedience based on faith always precedes God's provision. We tend to want God's provision and then we'll obey. No, that's not the way God works. It's never been the way God works. He's always said, once you step out in faith, then I will provide for what you need. But if you're not willing to step out, don't expect the provision. Because if you're not willing to change, you're going to do things your own way from now on, you don't need God. And I'd hate to volunteer to be in that position. We always need obedience based on faith. And it will always precede God's provision. And we see that in this story. They were challenged to step out into the waters. Let's go back to our text. Pick up in verse 9. It says this, Joshua said to the Israelites, come and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you. And he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Gershonites, the Amorites, the Jebusites. See, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. As soon as the priests who are carrying the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap. So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the ark of the covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan was at its flood stage during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing, and it piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam, in the vicinity of Zarethan. While the water flowing down to the Sea of Arabah, the Salt Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho, and the priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completely crossed on dry ground. There's a number of miracles that happen here, but they were all dependent on people taking that step of faith. We know, because God told us, that the water was going to stop. It was going to pile up. Now, to me, with my imagination, I'm wondering what it was like at the town of Adam, when all of a sudden this river that was flowing started piling up into this giant water column, heap, whatever you want to call it, but it probably freaked the people out. This has never happened before. You're right, because the people of God had never walked in obedience the way God wanted them to do this way before. And so now something new was happening. And it probably caught the attention of everybody, because this was happening. And yet, as we look at this, it says, when you see the Ark of the Covenant that the priests are carrying, as it goes into the Jordan River, this is what's going to happen. And this is all stated on what God had shared with Joshua, and Joshua is sharing with the people. This is what God has promised. This is what's going to happen. None of it had happened yet. The priests hadn't picked up the ark. They hadn't walked into the water where all of them were in the water. The water hadn't stopped. But not only did the water stop and pile up, it says that the ground became instantly dry, because it says they went and stood on dry ground in the middle of a flood swollen river. God did a bunch of miracles here. But it took stepping out in faith. But it also took our second point, and that is they needed to keep God as a focus all the time. It wasn't about the miracle. The miracle was amazing. It wasn't about the miracle of the water stopping was amazing. It wasn't about the miracle of the dry ground. It was about the presence of God. They needed to keep God as a focus. They were told to keep 1,000 yards back. Why? One basic, simple reason. The further back the crowds kept, the more people could see what was going on. If you have a bunch of people who are crowded around and they're all crammed in a little area and they're all crowded around, can you really see what's happening? No. Take any sporting event after a team wins and you have the fans and the crowd and the players and they all gather around. You don't know what's going on in the field. It just looks like chaos. And God says, I'm not a God of chaos. I want you to know what is happening. And that it's happening according to my word. So I want everyone to be able to see what is going on as the people get ready to cross the river. And they had to keep God in the focus. And even Joshua had to keep God in the focus. Joshua was given this incredible promise. It says earlier when we read that God told Joshua, I will make you respected, honored in the eyes of all Israel. And Joshua didn't go, yep, it's my time finally. It's all about me. God, show everyone. No, it was all about God. Joshua didn't claim things for himself. He didn't steal the glory of God for himself. He said it's all God's. We're God's people. We're doing what God said. We're going to let God be in charge. We need to guard ourselves because we need to make sure that we don't let God's blessings become the focus in place of God himself. So many people do that. And everyone that I've known that's done that has walked away from God in the church. Because I've got what I wanted. Things are going well. Aren't I a good guy? A good gal? And then you don't see him anymore. We need to keep God as a focus, period. It's all about God. I love that song. It's always a challenge, but I love the song that goes, it's all about you, Jesus. And all this is for you, for your glory and your praise. It's not about me, as if you should do things my way. We need to start living that way. Joshua lived that out. It's not about me. I'm the chosen leader, but it's not about me. It's about God. It's about Yahweh, and his presence is in the middle of the river. His presence is stopping the flow. His presence is giving us dry ground to go across. We need to keep our focus on God and God alone. Joshua wasn't even part of that because he wasn't a priest. He wasn't part of that because he didn't go out and stand in the river going, oh, look at me. He said, no, look at God. Look at God. Look at what God is doing. God's presence is the key. I don't care how amazing a situation is. If God's presence isn't there, I don't want to be part of it. I don't care how well-oiled the machine is. I don't care about how, quote-unquote, big something is or small something is. I only care about God's presence, and that's the way we should be as a church. We should only care about God's presence. That is the key. In this chapter, it's a short chapter. We've read the whole thing. It's only 17 verses, but 9 times the Ark of the Covenant is mentioned. Why? Because 9 times God wanted to reinforce that his presence is the key to everything that's happening. We can have a quote-unquote great prayer meeting where everyone shows up, but if God's presence isn't there, we've missed the point. We can have wonderful services, but if God's presence isn't there, we've missed the point. We can have great outreaches like Church in the Park, but if God's presence isn't there, we've missed the point. We need to get back to focusing on his presence. Is God with us? And is he so saturating us that you can't go a sentence or two without talking about the presence of God? That's the way it needs to be. That's what God is calling us to, because he has great things in store. We haven't even gotten to the line yet. We're just looking at God's presence, and he's leading us to that line. And in the story, that line was the River Jordan. And that brings us to our last point today. We need to be willing to pass the point of no return. We like to have our backup plans. God is the only plan. And with him, you don't need a backup plan. But we like to have our backup plans. I've always been challenged by the coffin missionaries. Now, I like to study church history, and some of the missionaries that have inspired me in missions movements that have inspired me are the Moravian missions movement. They started from a prayer meeting with a bunch of people together, and that prayer meeting started and didn't end. It was continuous, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it didn't end for 100 years. And it wasn't a big group. It started with like 30 to 50 people, but they committed to seeking God. And from that came this missions movement that has spread across the globe and still is sending out missionaries to this day. I've been inspired by them, but then I was inspired by the coffin missionaries, and they caught my attention because, coffin, what's a coffin missionary? Oh, we're going to go. No, never mind. No, they were committed, and they were so committed that they didn't want to come home until God was done with them. So they packed their belongings in the coffin, and they said, we will return back to our country of sending when we return as a corpse in this coffin. But other than that, we're not coming back because we have a mission before us. Talk about not having a backup plan except God. That's all we need. But we try to make it so confusing, so hard, so difficult when God just says, trust me. Trust me. Get to the point of no return and step out in faith. The people of Israel. For them, there was no going back. Remember, the river was at flood stage. It took a couple miracles of God to get them across. How are they going to get back? Because God wasn't turning around. God wasn't going, oops, I made a mistake. You're at the wrong place. No, God was moving forward to give them promised land. And so if they wanted to go back, they had to do it in their own power and ability and their own wisdom. There was really no backup plan. We need to get to that point. It's not enough to come close to look at the line. Remember, this is the second time Israel had done this in 40 years. And the first time when they got close and looked at the line and didn't cross the point of no return, a whole generation had to die because they lacked faith. They didn't have their focus on God. And now they're there again. Will they make the same mistakes as their fathers? Well, we know because we read the story that they didn't. They crossed on dry ground. But we need to be willing and understand that it's not enough to come close to that line. Knowledge isn't enough. It must be put into action, and we have to actually cross that line. What is that line in your life? What is God challenging you to do? Are you willing to put it all on the line to build something that lasts because God's building it and you get to be a part of it? I was thinking about the history of our church, and the old fellowship hall was the original church building built back in like 1908. It's been around a while. How did it get built? Because a bunch of people were passionate, and they put their time and their effort, and they built the building themselves. They didn't hire contractors. They didn't wait until they had enough money. They just started building, and it's an incredible building. I've gone up into the rafters is a bad way to put it. Attic is a bad way to put it because up above the fellowship hall it's like 13 foot tall. It's like a whole other room. But to see the original beams that they brought in themselves because they cut down trees on their property and they put it together and they put in the time and the sweat and the tears to build that because they wanted this county to be impacted by the gospel of Jesus Christ for generations to come. Are we willing to put in the same amount of time? We sit in a building that's about 40 years old. People sacrifice to build the building we're sitting in. What are we doing to invest in the next generation? The people of Israel were willing to cross that line. They acted in faith. Are we willing to do the same thing? We need to remember what James chapter 2 verse 18 and 19 or 17 and 18 says, and it says this: in the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accomplished by actions, is dead. But some will say, I have faith. Or you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by what I do. Do you believe what God is saying to you? Do you believe the challenge that God wants to bring about incredible change? He wants to be the catalyst that changes your life, your family, your history, your reputation. Then you need to step out and show that you have faith, and you need to walk in that faith. You need to let God change everything. And today we're at that line of no going back. Because God is challenging all of us. Hey, I have great plans for you, which is a verse we've talked about a bunch. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future beyond anything you could ever imagine. But you have to step out in faith, because it's not going to come to you. You have to follow me as we walk into that promise together. You want to see your family come to Jesus Christ? You need to start walking by faith. You need to cross that line and not look back. You need to look forward to what he has for you, because he has great plans for us, and we need to be willing to do that. If you want to see your work environment changed by the hope and the peace and the power of God, you need to cross that line. Don't hold back. Don't be shy. Walk in obedience. Walk by faith. Well, I don't know what they're going to do. That's the point. You don't know what they're going to do, but God does, and he's already in charge. Are you walking in obedience to him? If we were to disappear in 1 week, each of us, would anyone notice in the community? I'm not talking about your family and friends. I'm talking about in the community. Would they notice that you're not here? Or would life just go on like nothing happened? If our church disappeared in 1 week, would the community even notice? Because if they wouldn't notice, then we're not walking by faith. Remember, all the people of the promised land were living in fear. Their hearts were melting because the people of God were on the border. And they were getting ready to cross that line of no return. We need to be willing to do the same thing. I want you to think about that as you take a moment to bow your heads. Because God is challenging us. He's challenged us to consecrate ourselves. He's challenged us to prepare. He's challenged us to step out in faith. And you might be here going, Pastor Rob, I've already made that commitment. I'm already living by faith. And if that's the case, keep doing it. Don't stop. Don't slow down. Keep doing it. God is cheering you on. But he's wanting you to encourage others as they step out in faith themselves. It's not enough that we do it and we're really good, because we're a community. We have to do it together. So if someone is struggling, we need to cheer them on. We need to encourage them. You might be here going, I'm ready and willing, but I've been waiting. Or I was really excited, and then I got distracted by life and problems and situations, and I don't have that confidence anymore. God is saying now is the time for action. Your confidence isn't on you, in your past, in your ability. Your confidence has to be on me. Walk by faith. Are we willing to do that and get to the other side and start living in the promise that he has for you and me? God is challenging